It's so good to see you guys again. I've really missed you since podcast 3. We are now at podcast 4, and this is the vaccine conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob. Don't interrupt.
I'm sorry.
Melissa and Dr. Bob. That's my radio
everybody.
voice. No, can you do your radio voice?
Well, I was, okay, so my usual voice is all like nasally and stuff like this.
Can you do like the deep?
Hey, this is Dr. Bob. Welcome to the vaccine conversation.
And we just lost half of our listeners at that point right there. Okay, no, anyways,
Right.
I'm just, here's mine.
We got to spice up this topic because today is informed consent.
And we already talked about the vaccine schedule. We talked about media sound bites, and we gave you guys an intro into sort of why we're doing this. And you want to hear more about that? Go check the previous podcast that we've done and make sure and rate and review them for us. We would totally appreciate that. And we're excited to be here having this conversation. So informed consent.
All right. So basically, informed consent by definition is permission granted in the knowledge of the possible consequences, typically that which is given by a patient to a doctor for treatment with full knowledge of the possible risks and benefits. Whoa. So
this is definition.
It's interesting. I mean, as a doctor, I think of giving my patient informed consent. And here it's talking about the patient is giving informed consent. So basically,
that's so true.
Well, I know. The way it is. So basically, I'm giving the information. It's my responsibility to give the information, and the patient's responsibility is to feel informed and then give consent to the medical treatment.
Because technically, don't you work for the patient? I mean, really,
Right.
That's what you're there for. I think this dynamic has really shifted somehow. But also, I just have to chime in and say, you're going to hear a lot of Dr. Bob saying, as a doctor, comma. And he likes to do that a lot in this conversation because I'm just a mom, guys. That's, the reality is I'm just a mom. That's all I am, just a mom. But I'm an educated mom.
Yes.
And there are a lot of educated parents out here that are in this debate. So I just wanted to point that out. So
who better to learn from than parents?
Well, parents and doctors should be on the same
Right.
team.
You're a team. You're a partnership.
Right.
And I feel like I've learned some of my greatest lessons in my job, not as a doctor, learning from parents. All right. And I learned who my smart patients are, who my really intelligent, really well-educated patients are. And I learn from them. And that's how I grow.
Well, I mean,
as not a doctor. Sorry, I'm not a doctor.
As Bob.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's important to understand because I'll say as a parent, you often get that whole, I'm a doctor, so therefore my opinion on this matters more than yours. But like you just read in the definition of informed consent, the patient is giving informed consent to the doctor. The doctor is at the hand of the patient to give that informed consent. So instead of being the other way around. And the biggest part of this definition that I find interesting is full knowledge of possible risks and benefits. Full knowledge. So informed consent, most people would agree, is kind of the cornerstone of medicine. This is sort of the basis for what medical treatment and medical science should be founded on. Informed consent, the rights of your body, the rights for your children to receive a medical treatment should be on the basis, including informed consent. It's a human right, like a basic human right. And so as a basic human right, you would expect to have full knowledge of the possible risks and benefits. But what I find so interesting about this, as it relates to vaccines, that's not what happens. That's just not the reality. As a parent, you are not given full knowledge of possible risks and benefits. And that's just the truth of what the situation is right now.
Right, exactly. And I think in practice, in day-to-day practice in a really busy office, it's hard. I mean, it shouldn't be hard, and we should do it. We should be taking the time to do it. But pediatricians don't necessarily have a half an hour or an hour to sit with each patient individually and give them complete informed consent for vaccination. It's just not practical. Now, if a patient schedules a half an hour informed consent consultation with me to talk about vaccines, absolutely. We spend all day talking about it. But
so what does that mean then?
Well, what I think I feel like patients in part have the responsibility to inform themselves before they ever step foot into the doctor's office.
I agree.
All about the risks of vaccines, the risks and benefits. Because if you're waiting till your first 2-month appointment and the doctor sees you and the doctor's done with the checkup and then the doctor, now says, now it's time for your vaccines. If you're waiting till that moment to get your very first informed consent on vaccinations, you've way missed the boat. You should have been reading about this a long time ago.
But what if you don't even know there are
And you're
risks?
right. That's a perfectly good point. A lot of parents don't know there's risk involved. And that's where the fault then I think falls on the doctor. As a doctor, if I ask, what do you think about vaccines? And they say, I want to do vaccines. And I say, okay, well, have you done some reading and research? Have you read the informed consent, pieces of paper? And if the patient says no, and I say, okay, well, let's go do vaccines, then that's on me. I didn't give them any informed consent. They didn't ask for it, but neither did I give it. And I feel like more doctors need to be proactive in making sure their parents get informed consent. But I think my main issue, though, is you can't wait till the doctor's office to start informing yourself. The informed part needs to start a long time ago.
But who would tell the parents that before the first appointment?
We are. Yeah, and friends and family.
But what about this? What about your first well-visit appointment, which is at, 6 days or 5 days?
Right.
What if that protocol that appointment became the place where the pediatrician said, by the way, at your next well-visit appointment at 2 months, this is what's on the schedule. Here's what I want you to take home. Here are the product inserts. Here's some information on here. I want you to go home and research this. I want you to talk about this with your partner or your spouse and come back to me at 2 months with a good idea of what you feel about this. Maybe that would be a nice rhythm to kind of put in place.
You're right. And I think I actually do that. I will ask them at their first appointment, what are your plans? And they tell me their plans, and I'll say, okay, well, 2 months is the potential starting point for vaccines. So make sure, please, you've done a bunch of reading. I'll give them research and resources to read, and they do that. But I think what we said before is where most doctors look at it is that there's nothing to consent to.
Or there's nothing to need to research.
Right. Vaccinations are so safe and effective. They're so automatic. You have to do them. So I, as a doctor, don't even feel any obligation to give you any informed consent because vaccines just are 100% safe for everybody. And if their patient also believes that, that's where everything falls through the crack and there is no informed consent.
Right. Because they don't even know what they're consenting to.
So I think we start with describing what is federal law. Like, what does federal law mandate in informed consent? Like, what does federal law say that doctors are supposed to do with each of their patients? What are all the doctors that I just told you don't do this? Mm-hmm. What are they supposed to do based on federal law? And it all stems from the 1986 National Vaccination Injury Act. Did I say that right? National Vaccination Injury Act, 1986, something like that. Where they realize vaccines have a lot of risk. There are a lot of bad vaccine side effects. So Congress passed a law that mandated vaccine-informed consent. And that's also the law that took all the liability away.
And so we are going to talk about that,
but
in a whole separate episode dedicated just to that 1986 decision and what it meant and what came from
that. But Congress realized that vaccines have risks, so we need to mandate informed consent. And this law, if you can just Google search, I like the law, how it's put on the National Vaccine Information Center's website. If you just Google search NVIC 1986 vaccine law, you'll see them spell it out. It basically says doctors are required to give informed consent before vaccination, discuss all the risks and the benefits. If there's a serious health problem following vaccination, doctors are mandated to enter that into the vaccine record and to report vaccine reactions to the vaccine adverse events reporting system. That's what the law says. And today we're just focusing on informed consent because there's a lot more to that law. And what I find interesting is that's a federal law, but states don't mandate this. Vaccine-informed consent is actually under the jurisdiction of the states. The federal law can't actually mandate informed consent. Which means
they can override it as a state.
So I know, like in California, we don't have any informed consent laws for vaccines. So doctors aren't mandated to provide any of this information. And I don't know how it is in other states. But it's so funny. I mean, parents have to get some sort of informed consent process to opt out of vaccines. A lot of states have laws where you have to read materials and watch a video. Some states actually you have to sit there and watch an informative video if you're going to opt out. But there's no such mandated consent to opt in, which I think is
because it's just so assumed that this is what you should do. I mean, I think that's what is important, is that people, like you're saying, people are not giving informed consent. They're just going along with what they're being asked to do and with what everybody else does. So like our family, I didn't know what I was consenting to really either. And I think some people assume consent is your signature. But when you go into your doctor's office and you have your wellness checkup or whatever, they're having you sign a form. They, at that appointment, give you a VIS statement, your VIS sheet, whatever. They're giving you that at that time. So you really don't have any time to look over this. You don't have any time to go take it home to your spouse and say, hey, what do you think about this? You don't have any time to go look up what these things might be true, not true, whatever. You don't have any time at all. What they're telling you is sign this form. Here's the paper, and the nurse will be right in just a second to give you this vaccine. So that's not really informed consent. You consented with a signature, and that's just releasing liability, by the way, to the pediatrician's office if something goes wrong. Like you see, you're signing consent to this happening, but you're not signing that you even understand the implication and the full context of what's happening. And I think that that's a very different thing. And so people assume, well, I signed the paper, but, and the pediatrician might say, well, you signed the paper. But that does not mean you really understood what your child was getting and what the risks were. I mean, we read the definition of the possible risks and benefits. That means all of them, not just hand-selected 2 of them and, putting some rare statistic next to it to make you think like that's not going to be my kid. Or they'll say the most common side effects are, fever or something that people think is just not that big of a deal. They don't talk about everything else. So they're not really giving us informed consent because they're not really telling us full knowledge of the possible risks and benefits. It's not even in there. Right.
And it's interesting if you look at the vaccine manufacturer package inserts, you look at how they mandate or they advise informed consent as well. So not only do we have federal law, the vaccine manufacturers themselves actually direct doctors. There's a section called the patient counseling section. Every package insert has it. And in each of those sections, it says the doctor should inform the patient about the risks and benefits of vaccination. The package inserts actually direct patients to the CDC VIS forms. They actually say that in the package insert. Read the CDC vaccination information statement forms. Report any reactions to your doctor. And in fact, some of the package inserts say doctors should give patients informed consent about the known reactions. And they even tell them about the temporarily associated reactions. So every package insert has a list of about 50 reactions that have been reported over the 30 years of vaccinations since we've been doing so many. And it lists like a coma, seizures, nerve injury, deafness, heart attacks, severe allergic reactions, severe behavior changes, severe rashes. I mean, it lists like all kinds of horrible things that you hear in those commercials about, side effects.
For every other pharmaceutical product.
Right. I know. And the vaccine manufacturers themselves actually say doctors should be telling each of their patients about these reactions.
Right.
And again, there's no time. And so I think that the fallback process is really to make these vaccine information statements available to patients in their doctor's office for patients to read.
You're saying the VIS statements, or are you saying package inserts?
No, VIS statements. I mean, it's just not practical to expect patients to read the package inserts in the doctor's office.
No.
That's where a patient who really cares about vaccine research is going to dig really deep and get into those package inserts. The VIS forms from the CDC are the kind of the short version. But I think those are actually worth going through. I actually brought a couple of those because I think, honestly, people talk a lot about vaccine risk and vaccine side effects and what can happen if you get a vaccine and what are the risks of it. And people always talk about how those risks really don't happen. Like there are no bad reactions. And we talked about the disconnect on, honestly, most pediatricians don't believe these bad reactions can happen. Well, that's where all those pediatricians that believe that are totally disconnected from science, because CDC specifically says in their 2-page summaries, these bad reactions can happen.
And this is just the short version.
This is the short version, right. So the VIS form, basically, you can Google search CDC VIS forms and get each one of these. But it basically says there's a section called "Some children should not get a DTaP vaccine or should wait." And this is for the DTaP vaccine, tetanus, diphtheria, whooping cough. Basically, if you had a life-threatening allergic reaction after the vaccine, don't get another dose. Well, that's kind of like duh. Don't get another dose if you almost died from an allergic reaction. They say any child who suffered a brain or nervous system disease within 7 days should not get another dose. So right there, they acknowledge there have been reports of severe brain reactions or nervous system diseases. Well, we'll talk about it later. Talk to your doctor if you had a seizure or you collapsed after a dose, or if you cried nonstop for 3 hours or more after a dose, or if you had a fever of 105 degrees or more after a dose. These are all under the reasons on why you should not get that vaccine.
But it says talk to your doctor.
I know. It's right? Listed under some children should not get it. Yeah, then it says, it tells you 2 reasons why you, or 3 reasons why you absolutely should not get it. But you're right. Then the next reasons seem milder. Talk to your doctor, and your doctor will help you decide.
It kind of feels like, it feels like that information is under that category because that's a legitimate reason why you should not continue with that vaccine.
Right.
But then they didn't want that to come across because that's such a common occurrence.
I know.
They decided to change the language to make it look like, talk to your doctor if this happens, as if it may be something, it may not be something.
Right.
Talk to your doctor about it. But again, when are you going to talk to your doctor about it? There isn't time to have these kind of consultations. Exactly.
So if you're a patient sitting in your office, like you're not sitting there right now listening to this, or maybe you are, but you're sitting. Maybe you're sitting there yesterday, or maybe you're sitting there tomorrow. If you're just seeing this for the first time, or you got these vaccines at 2 months and now it's 4 months, and you weren't even given this, and maybe your kid did scream nonstop for 3 or more hours, or maybe your kid did have a seizure after the vaccine, or maybe your child had severe behavioral changes or neurological problems, and you didn't even see this before, and now you're seeing it for the first time while the nurse is drawing up your shots.
Right. Well, because if you come to your pediatrician to tell you that, they will tell you that this is all normal.
Right.
So what happened the first time was normal. So it's not something that's going to keep you from getting this next dose, even though, like you're saying, not just the manufacturer would agree with that, but the CDC is already saying that. Right. And this is just not a back and forth conversation you have with your doctors. It's just they hand you the form right before it happens. Like, I don't know if people really understand that. And one thing that always irks me is that the doctor's not even giving these vaccines. It's always like the nurse, right? They push it off onto the nurse, or in our experience it was, which feels very, I don't know, like you're losing your culpability because you're the doctor who tells you need to do this regardless of what you just said happened. And I'm leaving now to let somebody else be responsible for the next dose. It just feels really weird to me. It feels impersonal, and it feels like somebody who you just have told about this. You didn't tell the nurse about your previous reaction. You told the doctor.
Right.
So she's the one administering something when she's not the one that you just had the conversation with. If something feels really weird to me, it's like the passing of the baton, but in a bad way. That it's almost like losing fault by putting it on somebody else's shoulders. And all of that seems like very wrong. And I think it's hard to trust that relationship when that kind of stuff happens.
I know. Yeah, I agree. That's a very good point. And I see that. I hear from patients all the time. They're telling me those events, how you just described them, happen in another office.
Right.
Over and over again. And so the next part of the VIS form is where they say, what are the risks from DTaP vaccine? And of course, there's mild risks like fever and fussiness, but there's seizures. You can have nonstop crying for 3 or more hours, which they say occurs in 1 out of 1,000 babies. And that kind of reaction is called encephalitis. It's a symptom of encephalitis where your brain is so irritated by the vaccine that you scream and scream and scream, and you don't stop screaming for many hours because your brain is swelling and it's inflamed. It's called encephalitis. That used to happen very often with the old version of the DTP vaccine. It doesn't happen as often with the new version, but the CDC says in their VIS forms, it happens in about 1 in 1,000 children.
Well, and what's important about that is that this is a statistic that is a lot more frequent than 1 in a million, right? And 1 in a million is the media soundbite we talked about.
I know. You hear severe reactions are 1 in a million, but that only applies to the most severe of allergic reactions.
Yeah.
Here you have brain swelling as 1 in 1,000.
And they're telling you 1 in 1,000 is really frequent, by the way. And that's just what they are saying.
Right.
You have to assume that people that are supporting a pharmaceutical product are probably under-reporting what happens. Like, you would just have to assume that. So if 1 in 1,000 is what they're saying, what are the real numbers? I feel like it's even more frequent than that.
Right.
This is just what they're admitting to, which already feels like I'm surprised they're doing that.
Right. And so, and then it goes on to say, several other severe problems have been reported after DTaP vaccine: long-term seizures, coma, lowered consciousness, permanent brain damage. They list all these risks. Mm-hmm. So again, when it comes back to informed consent, the vaccine manufacturers list all this in their package inserts.
Because
the
legally
CDC,
they have to.
Legally they have to. CDC lists all this. But do doctors ever believe that any of this ever happens?
Or do they sit down with you and read like you just did? Like nobody's reading that.
Right.
They give it to you to go read at home. But what happens is you fold it up, put it in your diaper bag, and you head home thinking, I'm going to do this at some later point, and he doesn't seem concerned about it. My doctor seems fine. So therefore, I don't really need to worry about it. Right. But it's definitely not informed consent.
It's not, because the doctor's not offering the information, the patients aren't reading it until, sadly, the most common time parents read these is long after they've had a vaccine injury.
Right.
They're looking back trying to figure out what the heck happened
and how it's
why didn't anybody tell me, and then they realize this was sitting in their diaper bag. The very thing it warns about happened to them.
Just never discussed with them.
Right.
And so what the American Medical Association says about informed consent is they say informed consent to medical treatment is fundamental in both ethics and law. Patients have the right to receive information and ask questions about recommended treatments. And it goes on to talk about other things. But ask questions, that's a big thing, because the idea of informed consent is saying, you know what, I'm concerned about this VIS form that you just gave me that says there's a chance of nerve issues or brain damage. This is what it says. I'm concerned about that. Can you tell me more? Can you tell me more about if my child is at risk for these things? But the thing that really happens is that you ask a single question and you are just instantly shot down, and you're instantly, now all of a sudden your team partner here has become your adversary. Like, this is somebody who is against you now, and they are looking at you with disdain and with this, I cannot believe I have to go through this with you. And, oh, you're not one of them, are you? What have you been reading on the internet? And it turns into a really uncomfortable conversation. And I've had a lot of personal friends and other conversations with people that I've seen, other parents who have detailed exactly what happened when they decided to question, when they decided to have an open conversation about this, how the doctor completely changed. Somebody who was so supportive and so nice, and it just completely turned into somebody else. And do you think that fosters an environment where you want to ask questions? It doesn't. It discourages you as a parent from being able to question what should be completely normal. This is what you said, probably the most complex medical decision that you have to make for your child during the early childhood, and you have to make it very frequently. And yet you are not allowed to ask questions. You're not allowed. The fact that you ask a question is almost, like I said, offensive to the doctor. They are annoyed with you, they're embarrassed for you, and they instantly make you feel like you've done something wrong. You can't possibly have enough information on this topic to even have a voice. Your voice doesn't matter. As a parent, you don't matter. I tell you what happens. You agree with me. I have the degree. That is what you hear all the time, bottom line. And it becomes so simple is in the mind of another doctor, not saying you, as another doctor, it's so simple. I have the degree and you don't. How dare you come to me with this information and make me spend an additional 5 minutes listening to you, or an additional 10 minutes having this conversation. And so we just went from, we're on the same team, to now we are enemies. And now I don't look forward to going into my appointments. Now I might even become even more hesitant to trust you because this just changed. And the American Medical Association says, and just like our definition of informed consent, it says we have the right to receive information and ask questions about recommended treatments, by the way. Recommended. This is your recommendation. This is not what you can force me or my child to do. And yet you hear the word coercion a lot, because I know a lot of parents who feel coerced. They feel misinformed about their information, and they feel that they were on the receiving end of intimidation, and they're bullied. They're bullied about something that we have a right, a human right to, which is finding out the information. We just want to know. You just want to know, you know, and you have a right to also refuse treatment, because that's part of the definition of informed consent. Right. That's part of it, is to refuse the recommended treatment. And that is supposed to be okay. And now I have a friend that has a premature baby, like I've mentioned to you before, who's dealing with this issue right now because she's being constantly barraged by people who are not accepting her choice to say, I'm going to handle this with my pediatrician in the office when the baby is out of the NICU. So she is saying, me and my health practitioner have worked on a plan for vaccination, and we are going to do this at the time when we start our wellness visits because the baby was born so early, and it's not enough for the hospital staff. They are, every single day they continue to say, I have somebody else you're going to have to talk to. You're going to have to talk to somebody else. So her informed consent is actually being denied on a regular basis because she's revoking that at this moment, and it's not being accepted. She's not being listened to. She's not being acknowledged, and instead she's actually being bullied. She's being bullied at a time where she has this baby who's so fragile, and she's barely keeping it together herself. She has additional young kids at home. She's just trying to get her baby healthy and through this NICU experience. And they're using that time to say, no, it's not good enough. You coming to me with this response, even from your MD, she has a medical doctor, pediatrician, it's not good enough. So you're not only are you not getting informed consent, when you do state your opinion on something, you're not being accepted. And that's a huge problem because you're not being honored, whatever your choice may be.
Right.
There's only one way here. And if you don't go in this one direction, it becomes a battle. It becomes a battle with your healthcare practitioner.
Yeah, and I think I want to shed a little light on why I think doctors seem to take it so personally when patients ask vaccines, ask questions about vaccines, or when patients refuse vaccines. I mean, like you said, doctors get so angry about this. And I think it's because a lot of doctors think that you're getting your information, number one, just off the internet, or you're listening to like some like actress or model who says she doesn't vaccinate her kids or her kids are vaccine injured. You're reading studies done by other doctors who their studies have been, debunked or discredited, or those doctors have lost their medical licenses.
You're saying this is the assumption.
Right. The doctors are assuming that you're getting your medical information about vaccines from all these non-medical sources
that are not qualified.
Not qualified. But I think what I've found is most parents I talk to, they're just reading the vaccine package inserts, and they're reading the CDC VIS forms, and they're reading your real research articles online, or
Public Department of Health, state information.
Right. They're really reading legitimate, credible resources, because there is a lot out there in the real scientific community about vaccine risk. Like we've already said, there's this huge disconnect.
Information exists.
So I think the reason that pediatrician is so angry is he or she thinks you're listening to an actress or a model. They don't know. They just assume you're not reading the CDC information or their package inserts or real research, and that's why they take it personally. I think if parents basically, if they say their resources, honestly, even then the doctor's not going to listen.
But I mean, it's not like we're going to have this back and forth of my peer-reviewed studies and your peer-reviewed studies, because it becomes like so tedious. I think my issue with that just getting information on the internet thing is a lot of times there's good information on the internet.
That's where research is now.
That's where you find peer-reviewed studies. Like it's so comical to me when somebody says, "What, did you find this on the internet?"
Right.
Like, yeah, that's where information is. And on top of that, you see a lot of stories from parents who have done research, and this was their situation, and this is what their doctor said. So you're getting a lot of actual information through the internet, but then you come back to everybody saying that's an anecdote. And one of my big arguments about that is it's always an anecdote, because every time you come to your doctor, what you tell them is what they go off of. They believe your information based on what you tell them. And so enough anecdotes, and pretty soon that's research. You know what I'm saying? Like that's actually data.
Right. But I mean, if you're a patient, you just tell your doctor, I don't want to get this one vaccine because I'm not comfortable with the 1 in 1,000 risk of encephalitis symptoms after that vaccine. I mean, yeah, the doctor can decide whether or not to keep you as a patient. They might kick you out anyway. But I mean, I guess at least share where you're getting your data. You know, in fact, if you only use CDC data, you have a pretty good argument that there is risk in vaccination. Anyway, but I think to be fair, I think not all doctors act the way we're saying they do. I mean, I know here in Orange County, I'm one of the very few that will take patients who don't vaccinate in my office. But I think a lot of the parts of the country, I think doctors maybe are at least more flexible enough to keep patients who don't vaccinate. I don't think it's as bad everywhere as it is here in Orange County. And I think
what's funny about
to give
that
doctors
is,
just the benefit of the doubt, there are doctors out there that will give you informed consent, will have a discussion. They will talk to you about this. You just have to make the time, because they're out there. And if your current doctor isn't, you go find one that is.
Well, I mean, I have to laugh, because the reason that you have so much time to devote to a podcast like this is because you have a patient list that is so healthy. As a side note, that you happen to take these risky, unvaccinated children, and yet they're not coming in as frequently with sickness, which allows you to have...
What are you trying to say, Melissa?
I'm saying that in another episode, we're going to cover that.
Yes.
But I mean, I'm saying you're here because you're not in there until 7 p.m. every night because of, a barrage of sick children, as a result of the fact that everybody is health conscious. You've got, your patients are health conscious, and you're one of the, it's funny that these are the patients that get excluded, but they're also the ones that tend to be more health conscious because they pay more attention to their child's immunity and the child's overall health. Yeah,
and that's going to be a great episode. I look forward to it because it's interesting to talk about that theory and ask the question, are kids who don't vaccinate, do they somehow seem healthier or have healthier, more natural immune systems?
Well, you have experience. I mean, you actually have.
Right, we're going to talk about it. We're going to ask that question, and we're going to talk about it. But I think what else is there on informed consent? I mean, it's...
Well, here's one thing that on a study on informed consent that I found. This is called an ethical obligation or legal compulsion, if you want to look it up on informed consent. But it says, amongst other things, it says, it cannot just be a patient's signature on a dotted line. The patient should be given the opportunity to ask questions and to clarify doubts. And it says there must not be any kind of coercion. Consent must be voluntary. The patient should have the freedom to revoke consent, to revoke it. And so it says consent given under the fear of intimidation, misconception, or misrepresentation of facts can be held invalid. I mean, that just leads to the legal point of, if you gave consent, signing your form in your pediatrician's office by you didn't get all the information was misrepresented, and something happens, it seems to say that there should be a legal right that you have to basically consider that informed consent invalid, that you weren't given to it. And it seems like there would be a potential basis for legal action because it was under the context of misrepresentation, or you were not given consent without coercion or without fear of intimidation. And this was an actual study on informed consent that talks about all the things that I hear parents complain about every day in different, groups, holistic parenting groups that aren't even about vaccines. You hear this kind of stuff happening, and you know that it is against what even research, peer-reviewed studies, what even research says about informed consent.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've heard that before. Interesting.
That's what I brought to the table today. Yep. But informed consent, anyway, this is something we'll probably bring up again, because one of the things with Immunity Education Group, which is our nonprofit, is that we focus on is being pro-informed consent. Right. That this is not a debate about being pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. This is about being pro-informed consent and anti-mandates. Because people aren't getting informed consent. I mean, this all goes together. You cannot talk about the vaccine debate without mentioning and discussing and arguing about informed consent and whether we're actually, as patients, as parents, are we getting it? I think the answer is no.
Right. Yeah.
What do you think? Weigh in on our website.
No, I agree. I mean, again, it all comes down to the patients that come into my office after these things after being treated this way in other offices, and they just want to sit down and have a conversation
without feeling threatened.
Right, exactly. And so many tell me after our half-hour conversation, they just say, "Oh my gosh, thank you for telling me about each one of these diseases in a real short statement. Thank you for telling me about vaccine risks. Thank you for telling me I have options. Thank you for listening.
So I want to know.
Thank you for being my partner."
With another medicine, now I've never had to do that for a child, but with a medicine, would a pediatrician typically spend the time to go over this is a new medication we're thinking of putting your child on, here are the risks and benefits, or do they do the same thing? Is there just a one sheet that they're given?
Well, I think it depends. If it's a medication like Ritalin with known severe cardiac side effects, yeah, doctors actually will take a little extra time to give more informed consent.
But why is that different,
like
though?
A psychiatric medication.
Doesn't that seem weird?
Oh, I know. No, you're right. I mean, if you read like the Ritalin product insert and you see how there is a chance of sudden cardiac death and then severe side effects, you're going to be very concerned as a parent, and you're going to have a very long conversation with your doctor. If you read the same package insert for a vaccine and you see all the neurological or cardiac side effects, you can't ask your doctor about it.
I mean, that just seems it's unreal.
It's a huge disconnect.
I don't understand if a pediatrician is willing to sit with you in the office and talk about the potential risks of a medicine that you're thinking of putting your child on. What's the difference between another medicine or pharmaceutical product that's going into your body that also had side effects? It seems like across the board, there should be a certain level of ethics that goes. But for some reason, it's like you're saying, there's a disconnect. For some reason, people think vaccines are different. They are above needing that kind of discussion for some reason. I don't personally I don't understand it.
And I want to share something that it's, we talk a lot about the package inserts, which have tons of information. We talk about the CDC VIS forms, but even those are starting to withdraw some of their informed consent. So there's been some very unfortunate changes in
You're saying they're taking off some of the things they used to disclose. Those are being taken off.
That stuff I read you about the DTaP vaccine having a 1 in 1,000 risk of symptoms of encephalitis. Right. The nonstop screaming for 3 or more hours. That was the old version of the
interesting.
Of the DTaP VIS form. About 7 weeks ago, they just changed it. They took off the 1 in 1,000 number.
Wow!
So now it just lists under risks nonstop crying for 3 or more hours.
It doesn't tell you how frequently it happens.
Doesn't tell you how frequently anymore.
I'll tell you how frequently it happens. It's 1 in a million because that's what you heard on your news station. Right. So they're letting you come to your own conclusion based on their other messaging that they're doing. Right.
And I'm going to steal your phrase. You told me taking those numbers off of the forms takes the reality out of the risk. Mm-hmm. You said that to me like last year when we read about this. Yeah, if you know your baby's going to have a 1 in 1,000 chance of brain swelling, that's reality. You can understand that. If you just see your child might have 3 or more hours of nonstop screaming, you just read past that and you move on.
And you assume it's not going to happen to your kid because it's so rare.
And you know what else they just changed, though? They used to have the warning of nonstop screaming for 3 or more hours, not only as a reason of what can happen, not only as a warning of what can happen, but as one of those reasons not to repeat the vaccine again. They took it off. It's no longer listed as the reasons to talk to your doctor about whether or not you should get this vaccine again. Completely gone. They just replaced it with a generic phrase, something like or other neurological problems.
But those statistics are still on the CDC website under reactions for DTaP.
For now. And until they take it off.
So the thing is they're not. If they know that information's there, they have it available, but then they're also not making it accessible.
Right,
they don't want you to know too much.
And they're reducing it. And the third change that the CDC just made with the VIS forms is again under the DTaP vaccine product insert. There's a section called "What if there's a serious reaction? What should I look for?" Like this is now after the fact. Mm-hmm. You've been informed, in quotes, about what can happen. You get the vaccines. Now what should you look for? The DTaP vaccines used to say severe allergic reaction, very high fever, or behavior changes. If you see behavior changes, notify your doctor. And this is under what if there's a serious reaction? Not just what if there's a reaction, but
and
what
you're
if
saying
there's
they
a
took
serious
off
reaction?
behavior?
They took off behavior changes.
And that kills me because that's the biggest indicator, I think, for a lot of people that don't have an emergency room visit. That's the biggest indicator that something is wrong. You start to see something change in behavior or personality.
Right. The new form just says, what should I look for? Severe allergic reaction.
And you're like, what does that look like? I mean, they're also very vague.
Right. And in case you're wondering, I mean, you can try to Google search older VIS forms. They're hard to find because the CDC updates VIS forms all over the place. So it's hard to find these old ones. I have them in my office, but you can still find it on the MMR vaccine information sheet. The MMR sheet actually still lists what if there's a serious problem. What should I look for? Severe allergic reaction, very high fever, or unusual behavior. They actually list for MMR vaccine, look for unusual behavior. That might be a serious problem.
But it's not like they reformulated this and now this new MMR doesn't have that problem, so that's why they took it off the statement.
No, right.
It's the exact same thing. They're choosing to not tell you. They're refusing information.
And because they took it off the DTaP vaccine VIS form, I expect the CDC is going to take it off of the MMR vaccine form pretty soon as well. But we'll see. So anyway, you're not always getting full informed consent.
Shocker, really?
Yeah, so bottom line, parents, you have to do your own research. Research, credible sources, talk to other parents, talk to other healthcare practitioners. But the bottom line is, if you're going to an office where vaccines are mandatory, I don't think it's possible for you to get objective informed consent. You have to go to a doctor that's going to be open to keeping you as a patient if you don't give your informed consent.
And again, our website has a lot of this information or discussions about this issue where we're trying to provide the other side of this debate. And so this would be a good reference point for somebody who wants to read online some information. Maybe they don't have a doctor who's open about it and they want to see the other side of it. All of our stuff is always sourced. It's always directly from the CDC or the California Department of Public Health.
Or an actor or an actress if they have a good point.
Or just anybody who tweets about it. Right. So, but yeah, all of our information is sourced. So you can trust the information even if it's not considered mainstream, even if it's considered, if it's what the news station says is not true. We've already talked about how the media is influenced, and that's important. So our website, immunityeducationgroup.org, and we have a Facebook page. Make sure to come comment when we post these podcast links. Tell us your feedback on what you thought was interesting, what else you'd like to hear in a future episode. And we could do this for days.
I guess we will.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, you guys. That was podcast number 4, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Peace we wanna see in the world. Yeah, the peace we wanna see in the world. Be the love we wanna see in the world. Be the joy we wanna see in the world. Be the change we wanna see in the world.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.